Welcome back. We just concluded talking about price ceilings. In the last segment, that's where the government imposed a maximum price that usually forced the price downward because you couldn't get up to the equilibrium price. Now we're going to talk about the opposite, a price floor. So in a price floor, the government doesn't like the equilibrium. They think the price is too low, right? And then they want to impose a legal mandate that the price paid must actually be higher. So a government imposed minimum price that can be charged for a product. So a price floor can be irrelevant. When? Well, it often is, right? Think of the minimum wage. When you graduate, the minimum wage should be irrelevant for you. I hope it's irrelevant for you. Minimum wage, if you worked full-time at the minimum wage, you make maybe $14,000 to $15,000 per year. Most jobs, like the low end of starting salaries for college graduates is usually 30. You should be nowhere near that. Right? That's irrelevant for you. The price floor, that price floor is irrelevant. So when the price floor is irrelevant, there's not much analysis that we do with this. Everything's the exact same thing. But there are times when the price floor does matter. Price floor is binding. And that's what we're going to look at, right? Market for unskilled labor. The government doesn't put in minimum wages because they think it has no effect, right? They put in minimum wages because they think some people are paid lower than what they think should happen. So, I'll just take a quick step back here. It's quantity and price here. Now it's listed as L for quantity and W for price. In your own notes, I think you should just put Q and P here, right? And once again, I want to reiterate, I've said this many times, but everything on here you should be putting in your notes, right? You should be graphing this so when you go back, you have your notes to review this with. So quantity and price, but the quantity is the amount of labor. The price here is the wage, right? And you have a demand curve, like everything else, right? There's a demand for labor. Firms will want to hire labor some price. Workers will want to work. And let's assume there's some equilibrium, about maybe $6 without price controls. So we have $6, $500, the market for unskilled labor. So you can think of this as like work at a fast food restaurant, or sometimes like the local grocery store will hire people, a lot of younger unskilled workers to do the checkout type jobs. There's all sorts of jobs that unskilled workers could obtain. Without price controls, say $6 is the wage in this example, and you have 500 people working. So how does a price floor affect market outcomes? Well, first let's think of a price floor of $5. Take a moment, I want you to pause and think about how would the price floor of $5 affect the market outcome? Okay, I hope you thought about this for a moment. A price floor of $5 would not affect this market outcome at all, right? The wage is already 6, so if the government comes in and says nobody can charge below 5, well, nobody was charging below 5, so this is an irrelevant price floor. Just doesn't make any difference at all. The term for this, we'd say it's not binding. It has no effect on the market outcome. What is the US, the current minimum wage is $7.25. That will have an effect, right? $6 is the current, is the equilibrium wage. $7.25 is the minimum wage. So $6 would be illegal, right? It is against the law to pay $6 an hour. And in fact, if you're unemployed and we're willing and you just want a minimum wage job, if you were willing to tell the employer, look, I'll take less than minimum wage. I really want the job. I'll take $6 an hour. You can't do that either, right? That is illegal. You are not allowed to do that. So $7.25 is the lowest. What do we have going on here? Well, at $7.25, that's much more appealing than 6, right? If you're a worker. So the quantity of workers is going to increase. The quantity supplied would increase. But what about the demand? Well, it's an extra $1.25 more. That's a pretty huge jump, actually, right? That's over 20% increase in labor costs, firms won't want to hire as much. Right? Maybe if you're McDonald's, you substitute out a worker for a touch screen when you can. I know that at Susquehanna, actually, Susquehanna University, a lot of the ordering is now done by touch screen at some of the restaurants here. If the minimum wage was lower, that might be with a worker. But instead, we can just have people touch in the computer. That doesn't cost. You don't have to pay wages or benefits for the computer. You just have to get the computer set up. And whatever the reasons for it, the price goes up, the quantity demanded drops, simple law of demand, and it's going to hold with the labor market as well. So we're going to see a labor surplus if you put in a minimum wage. So this is what we'd call a binding constraint, right? This matters. Price will be forced up, and it will cause a surplus, and for a minimum wage, it will cause unemployment. So minimum wage laws, as we mentioned, won't affect highly skilled workers, but teen workers. Most studies indicate a 10% increase in the minimum wage raises teen unemployment by 1 to 3%. Once again, we in this class look at the positive analysis, right? We are looking at what happens. This is all what happens. We're not actually saying, is a minimum wage good or bad? I would expect different opinions across individuals in the class. What you need to know is what happens, the positive analysis here. So if you put in a higher minimum wage, what would you expect? More unemployment among low-skilled workers. And it's tough to assess overall because there's a million things going on in the economy, but most of the studies do indicate that teen unemployment tends to go up maybe about 1 to 3% when you have a 10% increase in the minimum wage. It's going to be especially damaging because while you might not think it, especially if you're younger and watching this, you might not think of it at the time. The big value in the first job, honestly, it's not the money that's earned, it's the skills you gain. Right, the money you earn, $7.25 an hour, might be a few thousand a year. Well, like a few thousand's better than not having a few thousand. But the skills you earn in those first jobs can mean the difference in, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars later if you acquire skills early in life that you can then translate, that help you move into positions, get you promoted faster in later positions. So the consequence of this is actually pretty enormous. 10% increase in the minimum wage raises teen unemployment by 1 to 3%. If you have an increase that's 20%, well, then you're looking at 2 to 6% increase in unemployment. So what happens if you put in a price floor, like a minimum wage? Well, the price will go up, but the quantity will drop. You'll see a surplus of the product, right? There's a surplus of workers. On your own, why don't you, just for fun, after this video is over, maybe make a note on the side, look up what teen unemployment rates are and compare it to the unemployment rates of adults, right? Teens is the group you would expect to be affected by minimum wages, whereas adults not as much, although some adults it would be. But compare what that is, right? There might be some other factors, but really the unemployment rate, if there wasn't a minimum wage, really should be pretty close for both of these groups, right? Wages should simply adjust. So that's something to do on your own. A Google search should, if you do a couple of Google searches, you should actually get to the official U.S. documents that would have that in there. But I'll let you try that on your own. So who wins and who loses when a price floor is imposed or when a higher minimum wage is instituted? Go ahead and pause and think about who wins and who loses in this case. Okay, who wins and who loses when a higher minimum wage is put into place or a new price floor is put into place? Well, what about the sellers of the labor, right? And then sellers would be workers in the minimum wage context. Well, the wage has gone up, so can we say workers are better off? Not quite. Some workers are better off. That is what we could say, right? If you work for $6 an hour and the minimum wage is increased to $7.25 and you keep your job with the same number of hours, you are definitely better off, right? You would kind of, the way I phrased it, who wins, who loses? You win, right? But what a great deal for you. However, if you are working for $6 an hour, the minimum wage is raised to $7.25 an hour. Your firm goes, yeah, we're cutting back on labor. I'm sorry, but can't keep you anymore. You are not happy about this, right? You're worse off because of this higher minimum wage law. So as far as workers, if it's a minimum wage, or just suppliers in general, if it's any type of price floor, those who can sell their product or keep working are better off. Those who wished they could but no longer can are worse off. What about those who demand the product, which would be firms in the case of the minimum wage, or just consumers if it's some other product? Definitely worse off. Right? Just have to pay a higher wage for the product or a higher price for the product. We go through minimum wage because it's by far the most common example. There are other price floors. Some states have minimum prices for cigarettes. That's a price floor. Pennsylvania, at least at times, has minimum prices for milk. And I believe that's a law that's still on the book, that there's some minimum price that can be charged for milk. Those are minimum prices. The same effects we saw here you would expect in those markets.